Welcome. We are so excited to have you all here. This is the 50th time our organization has done this, released a scorecard of what the performance of our leaders in Sacramento is in the previous year. We're really excited this year, a lot to talk about. What I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through what the results were and I'll walk you all through the results. And then we're going to hear from 4 of our Climate Caucus champions with us today, who were key to all of the victories and accomplishments California had in 2023. Before we walk through all the results from our 2023 scorecard, I want to talk a little bit about why we do the scorecard. The scorecard is really a tool to create transparency and accountability for voters. We want to pull the curtain back. There's a lot that happens in Sacramento. We have 120 legislators. We have thousands of bills that go through the legislature. There are committee votes. There are full floor votes. There's behind the scene politics. All of it matters. And for voters in their everyday lives, it is so hard for them to keep track of, impossible, everything that's going on and have an understanding of how their leaders, their elected representatives, the people they voted for, are acting in their interests and on their behalf for our future, for justice, and for clean air, clean water now. And so this tool is really what pulls that curtain back, creates accessibility for voters. A few years ago, we started to make this tool laser focused on the 2030 deadline, laser focused on the climate crisis and what California needs to do to create the policy roadmap for action for the world. All of the pieces we have to take care of. And here's why that is important. That is important because we know we have the solutions to the climate crisis. We know how to make clean energy. We know how to make our communities and our landscapes more resilient. What we don't have is the political will and power to do it at the rate and scale science tells us we have to. So that's why we are focused every year on our scorecard on what can our leaders do to make sure California proves we can solve the climate crisis and make communities resilient before 2030. So the 2023 scorecard. I'm going to walk through your all's results in just a minute, but first I want to talk about our theme for this year. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We landed on this theme because California had some historic, globally relevant wins this last year. We moved things forward in terms of the change we have to make to solve the climate crisis that literally are going to change global markets. Truly exciting. At the same time, we had some devastating anti-environmental actions happen in our state. So we are undercutting our own progress in a lot of ways. As we do make big steps forward on the climate crisis, we're also undercutting our own progress with some anti-environmental actions at the same time. Next slide. So some of the big steps forward California took. We passed SB 253 and SB 261. These are, again, first in the nation policies that will require any large companies doing business in California to measure and disclose their emissions and their financial risk. And this includes multinational companies. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. So this is essentially national policy that will have international impacts. We also passed some great bills on orphan well cleanup, codifying 30 by 30, creating fairer water rights, oil spill penalties, reforming the referendum process so corporate polluters cannot exploit the referendum process for their gains, offshore wind, clean transportation, and then we had a huge regulatory win with establishing advanced clean fleets that the California Air Resources Board did. Again, nationally relevant policy that paves the way for other states, our national government, and other countries on what it looks like to make the changes needed to protect communities now and in the future. Next slide. Fortunately, we also took some steps back. As wonderful as those wins were and that progress, we also undercut that progress with cuts to the climate budget. I want to talk about why cuts to the climate budget is so important. We have significant goals and targets on reducing emissions, on protecting 30% of our land and waters, really globally relevant, aggressive goals and targets that we've put into law. We've committed to as a state. It's now law for our state. The problem is we are not funding the transition to clean energy and resilience. to meet those goals. Now that we have those goals, we have to do the work to achieve those goals. And it's going to take big, significant government investments to transition to electrification, clean energy, and resilience to make it happen. So we cut the budget last year by billions of dollars, the climate investments that were committed. We also had 15 priority bills that failed to make it through the legislature. 11 key bills were vetoed by the governor. We extended and expanded gas plants all over the state beyond their sunset dates. We weakened environmental policy through trailer bills that were jammed through in May and June during the budget process. And then the very environmentally devastating Sites Reservoir was streamlined for review by the administration. These are some of the big things California did last year to undercut our own progress and our own momentum on climate. Next slide. Now, leadership scores. So just as a reminder, the way our scoring works is for legislators, their score is made up of what their votes were on the toughest bills of the year, whether they authored some of the critical bills of the year, because you need to get 100% to get the best score you can get. You need to not just vote right, you need to be leading on these issues. So whether or not they authored some of these toughest bills, and then also whether or not they take oil money. And we'll talk about in a minute whether that's important. Our leadership scores are similar, but for the governor, it includes environmental actions. So things like suing oil companies, the price gouging leadership, advanced clean fleets rule, cuts to the budget, and then signs and vetoes, credits for signing critical bills, and then reducing points if you vetoed critical bills. We also gave the governor credit for things like signing international agreements on climate, which is really important as California's fifth largest economy in the world. And then for leadership, their scores are made up of their individual votes plus how their caucus performs. As the leaders of the Senate Democratic Caucus or the Assembly Democratic Caucus, it's really critical that we are holding them accountable for how their body as a governmental body performs on climate as well. That's their role as leaders. And then they have a portion of California's overall score as well. And so we see California score, we see the caucus score, and we see their individual votes. You'll notice Assemblymember Robert Rivas, this is the first year that his score has included the caucus score and the California score all at once versus just his own personal contributions to climate action. And then his percentages were a little less because he became speaker towards the end of the towards the end of the legislative session. Next slide. So I want to break down a little bit what we saw amongst the senators and the assembly members. So average score between Senate Democrats and Assembly Democrats, very similar. Same average score kind of similarly between average Republican score and the Senate side and the Assembly side. And then you also see senators received a perfect 100% score. There were 8 on the Senate side and 12 on the Assembly side. Next slide. And I want to talk about oil money. So part of what we score is we score whether or not legislators take money directly from oil companies, Chevron, Exxon, all of the worst who have been really lying to the public and spurring on the climate crisis for decades now. And so what we saw that's really exciting this year is we saw oil money drop from 63% to 52% in terms of the number of legislators take oil money from 2022 to 2023. This is huge. This is exciting. It means that legislators are starting to really respond to what we know is true with voters. 79% of voters across party lines are more likely to support a candidate they know does not accept corporate polluter dollars. I'm going to say that again. 79% of voters across party lines are more likely to support a candidate who they know does not accept money from corporate polluters because they know what that means. So we see a steep drop here, which is very exciting, and the first time we've seen a drop like this. Next slide. The reason this is so important is because, as you can see here, the average score of Democrats who don't take oil money is an A. The average score of Democrats who do take oil money is a D. And then you see average score of all Republicans is 8% and they all take oil money. We need them to be better. But looking at these numbers, it makes it crystal clear what the issue, what the obstacles are for us to achieving the boldest, most justice-focused action in California on climate. And that is the influence of corporate polluter money in our politics. This makes that crystal clear. This is the data, and this is why we track that information. This is why we take away points if people take oil money, because we know it is going to have an outsized influence on what California is able to do on this critical issue. Next slide. I'm really excited to say part of the reason that we saw such a significant drop in 2022 is because, or in 2023 from oil money, is because the folks who were elected in 2022. We had a huge class of champions elected in 2022 who did not take oil money when they got elected. These are a number of folks who all these folks we endorsed, we worked on their behalf, and so there was a huge shift from the people who got elected in November in 2022 of who took oil money and who didn't and how they succeeded in getting into office. And so we had this new class of folks. You'll notice on our website as you look over envirovoters.org/scorecard, you'll notice a new kind of symbol on people's pages. And it means that they are a newcomer, a noteworthy newcomer who has been a champion for us. Folks who got good scores, really voted on all the key issues, didn't take oil money, and we have a huge class of new folks who are really killing it in Sacramento right now. Next slide. So we talked about kind of what did and did not happen in 2023. Now we need to talk about, for a quick minute, what needs to happen in 2024. The reason this is so important, the reason that accountability, transparency is so important is because we have the vision. We know what the plan is. We know what we need to be doing to solve the climate crisis. All of this is achievable when we empower, lift up, elect folks who have the vision and the courage to do this work. We have to fund this transition. I talked about that earlier. That is one of the most important things. We know what we need to do. We need to fund the transition. We have to electrify our buildings and transportation. We have to invest in transit and active transportation. These are some of the biggest areas of pollution and carbon emissions in our state. We have to scale clean energy rapidly, strengthen transmission and the grid. We have to strengthen and protect workforce standards. As we're creating new industries, we have to make sure that they are not losing all of the gains that our union brothers and sisters have made over 100 years. We have to make sure these new industries, as they are using public dollars, are creating good family-sustaining jobs, that we are creating standards for the new jobs and industries that are created as part of acting on the climate crisis. We have to invest in creating resilience across our landscapes and communities. We have a commitment of 30 by 30. We've made it. It's been codified into law by the legislature last year. We have to protect 30% of our lands and waters by 2030 in order to have a resilient future. We have to make our landscapes more resilient to catastrophic wildfires and drought. We have to make our communities more resilient to pollution, extreme heat, and flooding. All of that we know how to do. We have to hold corporate polluters accountable. We have to hold them accountable to disclosure, to fast and thoughtful implementation of SB 253 and 261, to transitioning away from fossil fuels, to not continue to pollute. All of these things are things we can do. These are achievable. California has made strides on these. We have to do them bigger and better in 2024. Next slide. I am so excited for you all today to hear from our Climate Action Caucus. We have folks who literally, we couldn't have done the big wins we had last year without these folks today. There's also all the newcomers I talked about. And then we also have a Hall of Fame group of folks who you've seen us honor in the past and every year are working hard and on the front lines to fight for the boldest, most climate or justice-focused policies. And they're on the scorecard website as the Hall of Famers. But today I'm so excited to highlight some key folks who we couldn't have made it it here without them. And I want to walk through who these people are and have you all get to know them and hear from them directly. But before I do that, Logan and Vita, I'm going to ask that we go back to the first slide that walked us through what the California score was in comparison to all the other scores. Yes, that one right there. I want to make sure that we really highlight this for folks, that we had a few years of inaction, 2019, 2020, 2021, where you saw California get a C, and a D, where we were not living up to our potential. We weren't really meeting the needs of voters. Voters are prioritizing their leaders, prioritize these things, make the tough decisions, invest what needs to be invested. And we had 3 years of some mediocre action. And then in 2022, California got an A. 2022 was California's biggest year of action ever in our history. We did things like first in the world nations on phasing out of single-use plastics, to buffer zones for communities, to strengthening our targets and solidifying our targets for emissions, to investing $54 billion in climate investments, funding this transition. All across the board, we did monumental things that year. This was a monster year of action. And then in 2023, we are getting an 86% for the state, a B. Again, the theme is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We had some historic, globally relevant wins. We also have some unfinished business from last year. Business around protecting communities who are bearing the brunt of pollution. Unfinished business around divesting from fossil fuels, ensuring that communities are having a plan for electrification and other things as well. And so we're at a place now where we are really looking for our leaders to continue to step up. Every year has to be a big year of action for climate change. Let's go back to the Climate Caucus slide. So I'm so excited today to introduce some of our folks who will be joining us today. Vita, should I start with Senator Menjivar, or are we still waiting for her to show up?
We're still waiting for her, so I would start with...
All right. I'm so excited today to introduce Assemblymember Zbur. So Assemblymember Zbur came out his first year as a legislator, one of our newly elected champions who did not take oil money, who got elected in November 2022, with a slew of impactful environmental bills. Things around local electrification, which again is unfinished business we're taking on this year, but passing and getting signed AB3 that's focused on offshore wind and job creation and good standards, like I just mentioned, for our new industries in the climate crisis. And on top of all of that, Assemblymember Zbur was at the center of some of the biggest fights our state took on last year. And I can say without any question that we could not have passed SB 253 and 261 without Assemblymember Zbur leadership in the Assembly, helping to make sure we got the tough votes and we got it across the finish line. I'm so excited to have Assemblymember Zbur with us today. Take it away, Assemblymember Zbur.
Mary, thank you so much for the very gracious introduction. I'm Assemblymember Chavez Zbur. I represent the cities of Santa Monica, West LA, Westwood, Beverly Hills, Hollywood Hills, Hancock Park, and more. And prior to coming to the Assembly, I spent 25 years as an environmental lawyer at Latham & Watkins, as well as before was in the Assembly, was on the California Environmental Voters Board for over 25 years and served as president of the board for almost 7 of those. I'm also proud that to recently have been appointed by Assemblymember Rivas to serve as the Democratic Caucus Chair. My current priorities are creating more sustainable housing and tackling our homeless crisis, LGBTQ plus civil rights, and fighting anti-Semitism. And of course, the reason why we're all here today. One of my very, very top priorities is moving California to a clean energy future and addressing the urgent crisis of climate change. Last year, we were successful with California environmental voters' support and help in passing the California Offshore Wind and Jobs Advancement Act. This bill was signed into law by Governor Newsom in October, and this bill is a key part of addressing climate change while keeping high-paying jobs in California. If we're going to be able to move away from dirty fossil fuel power plants and Diablo Canyon, we need offshore wind to meet our electrification needs. With the state's expansive coastline and nearly constant wind, our state is the perfect place to build and utilize this renewable resource. It will also play a major role in helping the state achieve 100% clean energy and carbon neutrality. California has robust offshore wind generation target of 5 gigawatts by 2030 and another 20 gigawatts by 2045, enough to power 25 million homes by the mid-century. But we must build the necessary infrastructure now in order to achieve our ambitious climate goals, while also protecting California's cultural and natural resources, developing new and expanded port facilities, and bringing thousands of high-skilled, high-wage jobs to California, and meeting our environmental justice goals and making sure that the benefits reach our most vulnerable communities. This year, we're going to move ahead with AB 1176, the Local Electrification Planning Act, which of course California environmental voters are supporting. In order to meet the state's climate goals, California will need a lot more electric chargers for auto and goods movement, and to support the 8 million electric vehicles expected to hit the roads by 2030, Californians will need at least 1 million more chargers, and even more will be needed to meet the state's 2035 electric vehicle mandate. Residential and commercial buildings also need to be upgraded. We need to include retrofitting and installation of electric appliances and equipment to cut greenhouse gases from our as-built requirement in all of our homes. AB 1176 requires cities and local jurisdictions to create plans that meet these important transportation and building electrification needs. We must ensure that electric vehicle chargers and building electrification is accessible to everyone, to renters, to multifamily housing residents, to commercial vehicle and truck fleets, and to our most vulnerable communities. If the only cars that we actually are going to be selling by 2035 are electric, we need to make sure that everyone has the ability to charge their cars. And this requires our local jurisdictions to become partners in this effort and make sure that they're doing the planning we need to make sure that everyone has access to the electricity and the infrastructure that they need. You know, California leads the nation in setting up, leads the nation with really ambitious climate goals. And now's the time to take all of the steps, the interim steps, to make sure that we meet those goals. We've set the goals. Now we need to step by step take the actions to meet the goals, and that requires a lot of work. And that's why California environmental voters is such an important partner in all of this. The organization has set climate as one of its top priorities, and is really in the trenches every day, really getting these important bills passed. So thank you so much for recognizing my work in partnership with California environmental voters and the environmental community and the environmental justice community broadly. Thank you, Mary. I'm proud to be here and be part of your team.
Good. Thank you, Assemblymember Zbur. It's wonderful to have you, and we're so grateful for you to be our clean energy champ this year. I'm so excited now to turn it over to Senator Caroline Menjivar, who, amongst being an 100%er in her first year in office, authoring a critical bill on supporting schools through extreme heat situations and really creating a name for herself as a resilience champion as well, Senator Menjivar has also just been a breath of fresh air and a departure from the person who held the role previously, Big Oil Bob Hertzberg. And we're so excited to have the senator in Sacramento really thinking with us about how to do this work in the best way for communities who most need it. Welcome, Senator. Thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Mary. Hi, everyone. Senator Caroline Menjivar. So excited to be here with you all here. And in fact, right next to me is the other Valley Senator, Senator Henry Stern, who will be joining y'all shortly. We're here waiting for our flights to take off to go back to the district. I'm here to talk about just the amazing work that our team is doing around heat mitigation. I represent the San Fernando Valley, an area, if you don't know, that gets extremely hot. In 2022, LA Times reported on a 93-degree weather day in the Valley, our school's asphalt get to 145 degrees. So imagine an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old wanting to play outside during recess and during breaks, but they can't because it is so extremely hot. For me, it's so important to ensure that we're making our kids be as successful as possible. And we know studies will show that heat mitigation, in fact, can impair their ability to be successful in school, can also impair their leadership, their confidence skills if they can't build those on the schoolyard and so forth, which is why I'm so glad that Enviro voters were one of my witnesses for my SB 499 last year to ensure that we address the heat mitigation in our schools' backyards. We wanted the local education agencies to put together a master plan to be prepared. We're seeing CAL FIRE bring down some grants in relation to this field, but we want to make sure that they're ready for those grants. We want to make sure that they had the plans to say how they were going to address heat mitigation. Unfortunately, it didn't make it out of Assembly appropriations, but we're still fighting. This year, we're looking at enhancing a bill like that, but for shaded structures all across our school districts. In fact, when we talk about heat mitigation, we also should be talking about the air pollution. I also have a district with 3 airports in it. No other member can say that they have 3 airports in their district. How much that's impacting our ability to breathe quality air on a hot summer day. So I'm looking at banning leaded fuel for our airports to ensure that airports like Van Nuys Airport, my Whiteman Airport, and my communities of most vulnerable communities are not further disenfranchising them, not further impacting our health inequities that we experience in our district. I will continue to work with EnviroVoters and various other environmental groups to push forward legislation that is going to directly impact our community. I think it's important when we have these gatherings and work groups that we have people that represent the communities that these policies are actually going to impact, that we have people representing at the table communities of individuals that are being disproportionately impacted from these kind of policies, from the LA, Long Beach Port to the San Fernando Valley, to the desert, to how hot it is. We want to make sure every kid is successful in their classes, that they have a place to go to and play that is shaded, that we have green canopy. Because right now, Mary, I don't know if you know, approximately 2.2 million kids in California go to schools where they have less than 5% of a tree canopy. That is a data point that I don't want to continue seeing. In the city of LA, we know that we have areas that we need to increase our green canopy. And I'm gonna cut it a little short because I don't want to miss my flight. And the other senator is actually going to be using my phone for his statement as well. So Mary, you can go ahead and introduce him, and then I'll hand it over to him.
Thank you so much, Senator. Again, so grateful for your leadership and being our environmental justice trailblazer this year. I'm super excited to introduce our next speaker, who is our accountability all-star this year, Senator Henry Stern, our accountability all-star, who honestly, this is way overdue that he's part of our Climate Caucus. Senator Stern is always at the center of the fight around climate in Sacramento. Regardless what the issue is, if it's a strategy, if it's how to overcome opposition, it's what moves we need to make with members to get this across the finish line. He is at the center of really organizing his colleagues, what the strategy needs to be, all the behind the scenes work. In addition, this year, he led and authored one of the most powerful bills the state passed last year, and that's SB 261, that would require that companies doing business in California have to measure and report their financial climate risk. He also played a pivotal role, and I can say this without question, in passing SB 253. Without the partnership of these two bills, we would not have gotten them passed, and Senator Stern leadership. Thank you for being with us, Senator Stern.
Appreciate you letting me photobomb or Zoom bomb Senator Menjivar here. So you helped get her to us. I'm just the beneficiary having other climate champs in the Senate. I don't feel so lonely these days, you know? It's a good place to be.
Good. Well, tell us a little bit about what you got planned this year.
Defense at first, right? I mean, we got to defend our progress, and they're trying to take us to court now, and they're going to try to roll us back at the ballot. Whether it's setbacks or disclosure. So the other side doesn't fight fair, and they're going to pull out a lot of dirty tricks right now. I think we got to just, be ready to go to battle in every single venue, whether it's working with the Attorney General to defend our climate laws, going and winning at the ballot box to defend setbacks, or pushing the envelope in the legislature and not letting us use the economic climate to cut back on the climate budget. So I think a lot of it's about defending our progress and, just being tough, just what EnviroVoters does, right? We show a path and there's optimism, but there's also consequence. And we got to make that very clear to Sacramento that California can't afford to wait.
Thank you, Senator Stern. Looking forward to partnering with you on all that. And I'm so glad you made the point about defending our wins, because the truth is we don't get to just win. Corporate polluters have immense resources and they will keep bringing all of our progress back to the table. And then we have to push it back. And so really appreciate your leadership and your vision around that.
Well, thank you. Keep it up.
All right, finally, I'm so excited to introduce Assemblymember Buffy Wicks. Assemblymember Buffy Wicks took on one of the toughest fights our state needs to take on around water rights. Really critical bill, AB 1072. If you don't know about it, look it up. Also authored some other water bills in the past as well, and this past year. But water rights is such a critical issue. It is tough. People are in the trenches on it, and it is so important to make sure that Californians continue to have access in a sustainable way to clean and safe water. It's about our water supply and it's about water access. And on top of that, Assemblymember Wicks also played a critical role organizing her colleagues and making sure that SB 253 got across the finish line. Assemblymember Wicks every year is a really critical leader on the assembly floor, having tough conversations with her friends, pushing her colleagues to make sure some of the toughest climate bills get across the finish line. And we wanted to make sure to honor that leadership today. And thank you for being with us, Assemblymember Buffy Wicks.
Thank you, Mary, for having me, and to all my colleagues who are on the Zoom as well. And there are many more of us too, and we are a growing coalition. As you said, I think we had picked up some important wins, climate champions this past election cycle, and I anticipate that again as well. And I think the reason for that is because the public is demanding it, and because of the grassroots organizing of organizations like yours and others who are organizing folks to vote on this issue. I think is obviously critical. And the reason why people are voting on it is because they're seeing it in their skies. They're seeing it in the wildfires. They're seeing it in, asthma rates and all the other things that impact our communities. And, I come to this issue as a mom. I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I'll never forget the day in September of 2020 during COVID when the day the sun didn't rise. And I was walking my 3-year-old to preschool, or my 7-year-old, who was about 3 at the time, maybe 4. And she said, "Mommy, what's going on? Why does the sky look like that?" And I just thought, how do I explain to her how we got here? That this is the world in which she is inheriting. It was very poignant for me, and I know many of us, to say, what are we doing? How are we living? Why can't we fix this? And we know the solutions to fix this problem. We have to have the political courage to do it. And that is what my focus is to ensure that we have the political courage to do the tough things. And, as Mary said, I'm sort of known for working the floor. I'll pick bills that I care a lot about, even if I'm not a co-author even on the bill. I just know that they're important, and I will just dive into those bills and do everything I can to get them off the floor when they're really important. And that's what happened with 253. I just thought, Scott, we got to get this thing off the floor. Let's make this happen. And Rick and a bunch of us really partnered on ensuring that we did that, because it's so important. And I knew California could lead the way. As Mary mentioned, I've done work in the water space. We have a lot of reforms we need to do in the water space. Water is one of the most important, critical rights that we have. Access to clean water. I mean, it doesn't get more important than that. Access to clean water, access to clean air. So I'll continue to do work in that space. And the other point I want to make is I do a lot of work in housing. I'm no longer the housing chair. I'm now chair of the appropriations, but I will still do a lot of work in the housing space, because I very much view our housing and transit policy as climate change policy. And I'm a big believer that when we build infill housing, we have to build more homes. The question is, where? Are we going to build them out in our open space and build massive freeways? Is that how we want to live our life? Or are we going to build infill housing with public transportation to ensure that there's equity and access to good affordable housing, but also done so in a way that helps us meet our climate change goals, and so that is a big focus of mine. And, when we build infill housing, it reduces our need for water. I did a big bill a couple of years ago on this, and we did a lot of analysis. Infill housing uses 40% less water. It's 30% fewer miles traveled. can reduce our greenhouse gas by 45%. And those are real tangible numbers. And so I know folks don't often think of housing and environmental issues as together, but I view them as very much one and the same, along with transit. And that's how I think we have to look at our reaching our climate change goals, is having housing and transit be a really critical part of that conversation, because it impacts all these other things. So I'm honored to be a 100%er. I think I've always been a 100%er or close to. I will continue to be a 100%er, and not just to vote the right way, but to lead the right way, and to really fight for these bills on these tough ones. So thank you for being here and for all the work that you all do every single day, holding people like me accountable, because that's what it's going to take. Because I know our constituents are demanding it, and frankly, our children are the ones who need it the most. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember. Thank you for being our water rights defender this year. We're grateful for that leadership. Looking forward to continue to partner on that work. We're going to transition. We have a number of press on the call to taking some questions in just a minute for press. But I do want to shout out one last member of the Climate Action Caucus who were not able to be with us today, and that is Speaker Robert Rivas. Speaker Robert Rivas made our Climate Caucus this year because really, truly, without his leadership, California would have been a do-nothing year, mainly do-nothing year this year. He stepped up in the 11th hour, got SB 253 and 261 across the finish lines, ensuring that California continued to do big things. And I will say a large reason for the wins this year are the leadership of the legislature in the Senate and the Assembly. And, you know, we know through the history of Speaker Rivas's leadership that he is a climate justice champion. He prioritizes these issues. And in his first couple of months as Speaker, he did just that. And he delivered a huge win for our state and for the world in the passage of these bills. So we're grateful for his leadership as well. Thank you for sticking with us. We were putting this in between kind of session ending, people getting to flights. And so we've been working through a little bit of some timing issues, but appreciate y'all sticking with us through this. And we're going to turn in just a minute to hear some questions from press. But before we do that, I want to make sure to say, go to envirovoters.org/scorecard to find out more about the scorecard, find out about your legislator score. You can look up your address and find out how your legislator score. You can find out who took oil money, who didn't. You can find out what bills were included in California's score, what actions were included. You can find out all the details on envirovoters.org/scorecard. Beta, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you all to our speakers and to Mary. We're going to switch to the Q&A portion of this press conference. So you can use the raise hand feature. If you're a member of the press, go ahead and raise that and I'll unmute you. You can ask the question directly. You can also drop questions into the Q&A option.
It looks like we have one question here already. Was 2023 a historic low for lawmakers who accepted oil money? That's a great question. Unfortunately, it's not. It keeps pretty even, that the lawmakers who accept oil money get about an average D every year we've been tracking this. So again, those numbers have stayed pretty even. They're similar to last year, that the legislators who don't take oil money score an A, and the Democratic legislators who don't take oil money score an A. The Democratic legislators who do take oil money score a D. So it isn't as if they did worse. They kind of always, the Democratic legislators score poorly. All of the Republicans take oil money as of right now in the legislature, and they get some of our lowest scores, right? Under 10% in terms of their votes on environmental bills. What was great was just seeing a shift from the folks who got elected in November 2022 and served in 2023 of the number of legislators overall taking oil money and seeing that drop by 17%. Looks like we have another question, Vita. I'll hand it to you.
Camille, go ahead.
Hey there. So thanks for having this. I wanted to know, it doesn't look like it's going to be a huge year for climate policy, but maybe I'm wrong and feel free to correct me on that. Just given the bad budget year and the elections, and Senator Stern said that he was kind of on the defense. So I wonder, how will you measure climate champions this year? What are you looking for from elected officials or candidates to make sure they walk the walk?
Yeah. So it's February 1st. And way too early to say if it's going to be a good climate year or not. I actually think it has the potential to be a huge climate year. And I'll tell you why. We have new leadership in the Senate and Assembly who have really named this as a priority for them in their leadership. And that's really exciting because that's what it's going to take is a Senate president, Speaker of the Assembly, and governor working together on a big vision, on some key priorities for the state to move this forward. In addition, we have some big opportunities. I mentioned in the slide where it talked about what California needs to do. We have an opportunity for a really significant bond effort to move forward all of these commitments to California and the world that we've made on climate, from resilience to clean energy. We also have a number of really exciting new bills that are being introduced. I'm not going to scoop kind of the deadline in the next couple of weeks, but there's some really phenomenal new bills being introduced. And then we have some unfinished business from 2023 as well. Some of the bills we talked about today, there's going to be more water rights efforts. There's going to be more transportation efforts. There's divestment from big oil. As a state that Senator Gonzalez is leading, there's local electrification. There's a number of actually really significant efforts that are already moving from bonds to policies in all the areas we've talked about. So I do see this year, there is so much our state can do. There's alternative actions to financing. We can cut all corporate polluter subsidies and corporate handouts and use that instead to fund this transition. These are some, just low-hanging fruit opportunities. These are no-brainer options to continue to have a big year. And what I would say is we can't afford any year from now until 2030 to be a mediocre year. We only have until 2030. This is an existential crisis. Our economy is going to go through ups and downs, but that is not the big picture. The big picture is the climate crisis and the existential crisis that Californians are being pummeled with right now. The bigger picture is that everything we need to do on climate is an infrastructure strategy, and government's role in crisis is to act. We have a fragile economy, and one of the most traditional ways to create a more robust economy is investments in infrastructure. So these are not just solutions for the climate crisis. These are solutions for our economy, to grow the economy, create good jobs. These are solutions on public health. These are solutions to protect communities now and in the future. So I have hope that 2024, with the vision of our leaders here today, the Hall of Famers, the newcomers, and our new leadership in the Senate and the Assembly, and what we know our governor is capable of as well, that 2024 can again be one of our biggest year of climate action ever. And that is going to be how we're measuring people's success next year when we're doing this again next January.
Thanks, Mary. This week, we had also asked our EnviroVoters community to submit questions in advance of this event. So one question that came in was, California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and we know regulators and leaders around the globe often look to California to set policy examples. Do you feel California is living up to its reputation as a global climate leader?
Yes, in a lot of ways. At the same time, there are things we are not doing. I think it's a good question because really our state has an outsized responsibility to prove we can solve the climate crisis, define how we do it with equity and justice at the center, and then create that policy roadmap for the world to follow. And we've proven in many years that we have the capacity to do kind of bigger things than any other jurisdiction has done. There have been years in our history as a state where we've done more than anybody else in the world. We've done first in the world things time and time again, but we aren't being consistent about prioritizing this action. We aren't being consistent about having a bold vision every year. In 2022, the governor came out so strong with big investments in climate in the budget, came to and worked with the legislature hand in hand during the end of session on a bold package to advance both protecting communities at home from pollution and advancing our global fight against the climate crisis. That was the year where our leaders had a big vision, worked together to prioritize that and make it successful. We didn't pass everything, but we passed a majority of things. And it's because our leaders had the vision, worked together, and prioritized doing something on climate. And that's the potential we have every year. That's all it takes. Is our leaders saying, this is important enough, we're going to do something big every year and we're going to work together to make sure it happens. That's all it takes.
And that is the end of our press conference. I'm going to hand it back to Mary. Do not forget to check out envirovoters.org/scorecard and also follow us on social at EnviroVoters. We are on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. So check out our content there as well. And all the scores will be online. And I'll hand it back to Mary to close us out.
Thank you so much. We're so excited you joined us. This was a year, 2020-23 was a year of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We took major gains and made major gains on our fight against the climate crisis. We also undercut some of our own success and progress by anti-environmental actions as well. Let's make 2024 a year of big steps forward and no steps back. Huge thank you, gratitude to the leadership of the folks who are here today, to our newcomers of the year that you can see on the website who were just stellar in their action on climate, and then to our Hall of Famers who year in and year out, you'll see them on the website too, are organizing, are leading, and are pushing an aggressive vision forward on climate justice. Thank you for being with us today. Have a great day.